Welcome to the Vegan Productions Christmas special. This year I spent many hours building a whole fleet of gingerbread fighter aircraft. Why, you might ask?
That is a great question.
I decided to film the whole thing and make this video because it was really fun, and when the weather looked like this, a vegan or sub 900 cookie was a pretty good way to cope with things. All of the files will be linked in the video description, and I'll walk you through the entire CAD to cookie process if you want to make your own designs. This video is a bit different than the usual stuff, but it's a holiday special. So instead of CAD and cool planes, you get CAD, questionable baking skills, and a high-octane decoration battle with gingerbread cookies.
So yeah, grab a juleskum, sit down and roll the video.
So why does a man decide to spend so many hours building airplane cookies? Well, it all started with a small box I got many years ago from this company named Saab. It's a bit of a weird name, apparently they make caravans. Either way, inside there was a cookie cutter in the shape of a griffin. It might seem small, but this was revolutionary. No longer did I have to make cookies shaped like hearts and crocodiles, I could make planes for Christmas. The next year I realized that one can actually make their own cookie cutters with a 3D printer. I found a Saab 105 model, printed it out, and it worked great. The year after that I used my newfound CAD skills to make this, a 3D-ish looking Saab 105. I started off in CAD, then made paper templates, then the cookies, and finally assembled it. Was it quite a lot of work? Yes. But it was worth it, which brings us to this year. I wanted to make two new cookie planes, and instead of using paper templates, I wanted 3D printed cookie cutters for all parts. So which two planes would I choose? Well, the Saab 35 Draken and the 37 Viggen. The Draken because it's cool, looks like a Christmas tree and can be made with only two parts, and the Viggen because it's the Viggen. Alright, it's CAD time. I decided to first make the actual cookie shapes and then the cookie cutters for those shapes. I did this to kind of be able to see how the cookie plane would look once assembled, so that's the order I will be showing here. First step is to find a reference image. Just search for technical drawing or just drawing with the name of your plane and pick one that looks nice. Next step is to scale the image. I wanted my planes to be at 1/100th scale, so the 16.4 meter long Viggen should be 16.4 centimeters as a cookie. I just made a line 16.4 centimeters long and scaled the image until it looked right. I don't know if this is a good way to do it, but hey, it works. Now it's time to trace the outline of the plane. I used a bunch of line and spline that rhymed and just made my way around the fuselage. I could then extrude this sketch to cookie thickness, which I assumed was 2.5 millimeters. It's probably more, but that doesn't really matter. And there we have it, a perfectly shaped blue computer cookie. Now it's just a matter of repeating this process until we have a plane. Next up I made the air intake, so tracing the drawing all the way around and bam, air intake. Then wings, canards, and there we have 4 parts. Using some fancy constraint magic we can assemble our plane in the computer, and look at that. I think that looks like a Viggen. Worth noting is that turning a 3-dimensional round and sleek fighter jet into a bunch of cookies can be a little tricky sometimes. Having a really thin fuselage, for example, the wings are actually way too big, but I had to make them like that for the wingspan to be correct. Some parts are too small to include, and also the canards should have looked like this according to the drawing, but I decided to ignore the air intakes and just continue that line because I thought it looked better. So you might find yourself going back and forth a couple of times changing stuff, but sooner or later you will have a finished plane. Or planes in my case. I also made the Draken. And now to the $1,000,000 question, how do we go from these CAD models to airplane cookies? Well, we make cookie cutters. There's probably a million better ways to do this, but I'll show you what I did. First, I created a sketch on the cookie. Then I used this thing to transfer the shape of the cookie to the sketch. Then I used the offset at 1 millimeter and extruded the outline of the cookie a couple of millimeters. Lastly, I made some braces/supports to hold the shape together. And that's it. I just needed to repeat this for every other part. Once done with everything, it hit me like a sled towed behind the Viggen. Wouldn't it be pretty nice to be able to flip the cookie cutter, you know, for mirroring the wings? Back to work. In the end I got something that was kind of okay but still pretty terrible, so I decided to give up and recruit my friend to do the work for me. Using this cross section and following the shape of my parts, he started making the cutters for me. So what were I going to do? Sleep? Ha, no, more planes but 2D. I started making a side view of a Saab 29, and once I was finished I decided that a top-down view would be better. I used the same method as before, extruding up and adding braces. I even went so far as to add some little fillets to make it a little nicer. At this point I was a little tired, I think. Saab 29 became Saab 92, which is a tiny green car, so I decided to make a Saab 92. And on the topic of cars, the Saab 900 is a good looking car, so I made one of those too, even added details to it. And then I made... The next day it was time for the baking. My friend had kindly printed out everything we needed, so 4 parts for the Viggens, 2 parts for the Drakens, 1 for the Saab 29, 4 parts for mystery plane he made as a surprise, and the 2 cars. I'm not the brightest baker in the kitchen, so I decided to call in a professional to show how to roll out some dough. Yes, very inspiring. I think I managed to replicate that somewhat. Now with a flat dough, it was time for the moment of truth. How much cookie would the cookie cutter cut? The answer? Precisely the amount it was supposed to. Look at that! Next up I tried the Saab 900, and even though the outline looked good, the details did not show. Which I was kind of expecting anyway, so you know, it is what it is. Using a metal cookie cutter, we can see that the lines are much sharper than our 3D prints, but I don't think that matters too much. One thing that does matter though is the transfer from the counter to the plot baking tray. Getting these off the counter without affecting the shape is nearly impossible. So yeah, what was once carefully crafted from precise technical drawings might get a little bent and asymmetrical. If we wanted our planes to look somewhat presentable and not like that weird plane meme, we needed to step up our game. Luckily for us, we had 1.5 kilograms of gingerbread dough to get through, so it was gonna be a long night. Whoa, I guess I must have made this dough a little thicker. Look at that, that is really cool. Let's do another one. Okay, pressing it down. Wow. I mean, that looks a lot like a Saab 900. Wow. Once the tray was filled, it went straight into the oven for 5 minutes, and there is our first batch of airplanes, cars, and a flower. And so the grind continued. One problem we did run into was that the cookie cutters I made could get dough stuck in between the walls. This could leave a little mark sometimes, but I didn't think that was such a big deal. I think it can be solved in a slicer by just printing the first layer a little hotter, or it could just be bad filament, but you should ask someone that knows more about 3D printers. These thicker cutters my friend made was a lot sturdier, and as you can see, these worked great too. And so the cycle continued, rolling out dough, making airplane parts, making Saab 900s, trying to fit as many cookies as possible on one tray, and repeat. And after what felt like an eternity, we had an impressive amount of cookies and an even impressiver amount of cleaning to do. And even though we were quite tired at this point, now it was only a matter of gluing everything together, right? Well, that is correct, but it's maybe not so easy. With all our airplane parts before us and our baking glue pretending to be a submarine, we dove headfirst into assembling our planes. I started gluing all Drakens on one side using this atrocious Dalahest to keep the wings straight, and since all Saab 105s were either assembled, broken, or somewhere in between, we moved on to the Viggens. The air intakes are very easy to put on due to the large contact area, and you can just leave them on there for curing. For the main wings, I carved out a bit of the intake to make the wings fit better. And for curing, the whole thing rests very nicely against the table with the wings flat. The only real tricky part are the canards, more specifically holding them still during curing. We solved this by just stacking our cookies for support. While gluing the other side of the Draken, I used this technique as well. I also tried gluing one of the Saab 105s, but it was very tricky. And so the airplane factory continued, gluing and propping up wings. It was actually very handy that we made so many normal cookies as well, because we needed almost all of them to hold our wings straight. After another eternity, all our planes had been assembled. The next morning, it was time for the results. First off, the Viggen, which I think looks so cool. This must be the coolest gingerbread cookie I've ever seen. 10 out of 10. Next up, the Draken, which also looks very cool, but I still think the Viggen looks more impressive. Those air intakes and the canards really sell it. The Saab 105 my friend made looks very nice, and the Saab 900s are very cool too. And don't forget the Saab 92. Now, this wouldn't be a video about gingerbread cookies without some decoration. Problem is, I'm not so good at decorating, so to spice things up, I decided to make a little competition. I invited a friend with artistic skills, and we gave ourselves 30 minutes to make the best decorated airplane. The prize? An ice cream. And so, the game was on, and she immediately got a toothpick and started drawing very tiny things. And so I realized it was pretty much over. The only thing we had at our disposal was the white sugar stuff and this candy, and since I cannot draw with a toothpick, the candy was my only option. In an act of desperation, I guess, I tried to cut one in two, and so I decided to decorate my plane with shattered candy parts. The Draken already looks like a Christmas tree, so placing the candy like this just felt right for some reason. Toothpick Lady was now making great progress while I started gluing on my candy parts. I also added a red and green nav light because, of course, at this point I started to get very worried, but luckily for me, her perfectionism kicked in, and after talking to ChatGPT, she was now doing progress in the opposite direction, with only 13 minutes left. Filled with new hope, I made these roundels-ish, which in my head were Swedish, but they look very Ukrainian. The Saab 105 was now turning into a bird, which was unexpected, but pretty cute. I decided to trace the outline of the wing, and when I looked up, I was met with this. I made a cockpit blob, and she started making a whole scene for her bird. I decided to add landing gear, and while waiting for it to dry, the time was up. We did add 1 extra minute, so I made some hard points. Okay, time for the reveal. On the left, we have the snowy bird Saab 105, featuring impressive decoration, scary eyes, some footsteps, and a runway. And to the right, this guy. Decoration is not that nice, but there's nav lights, landing gears, and hard points. So which one would take the win? Well, we invited 3 humans and a dog, and everybody liked the bird more. I'm sorry, buddy. The ice cream was awarded to the winner, but I didn't even want that ice cream. I have a ton of vegans to eat.
Okay, that's the end of this video. I know this is posted after Christmas, but you know I'm pretty slow at making videos, so yeah. Either way, Merry Christmas to all of you, and I'll see you another time. Good night.